So, the word car crash comes to mind today, Melissa, for a couple of reasons. Firstly, I was in the real life equivalent of a car crash, which is just a car crash, at the weekend. Wasn't too serious, thankfully. Car's banged up a bit, it's in the shop getting repaired. I was kind of shocked. It was a bit of a sudden, scary thing. Mostly my fault as well, which made it kind of weirder to process, I guess. But no one was hurt, apart from the other guy's car. And all in all, the insurance is going to take care of it. So not too bad. But you were also in a car crash of sorts, but the poker kind, which has led us to today's topic, which is about quitting sessions, when to do it, why to do it, whether to do it or not. So what happened to you at the weekend?
Yes. We're not talking about quitting poker. We're talking about quitting sessions,
right?
Just to frame it correctly. So this was a pretty unbelievable spot. And for those of you you're loyal Poker Distilled fans, if you listened last week, Pete and I talked about, I had brought up a situation where I felt like I was nearing the end of a session and I was ahead, and I felt the impulse to leave the game because I was afraid of getting into a big hand and then losing my chips and booking a loss instead of booking a win. And I wanted to have a kind of the kind of comfort of booking a win rather than risking booking a loss. And then we discussed how that's a big leak and a flaw that has to be confronted and kind of conquered in a lot of ways. So I confronted this exact situation the night we recorded. So we recorded in the morning, at least on my time. And that evening I was playing, and I had a great session. It was the end of the night. It was a little after midnight. I was up about $900, almost 1K. I had played great. The session had gone great. I was feeling good, and I was getting really tired, and I had to work the next day. And so I kind of played later than I had planned on. So I was really just leaving because I was tired and I needed to work. So I went over and I got my rack, and I came back and I put my chips in the rack. And as I finished racking my chips, the dealer threw two cards at me, and I was on the button, and I looked down and it was pocket aces. And so I thought, okay, well, I guess this will be my last hand. And it was a straddled pot, under the gun straddled 10. So when they came to me on the button, I raised to 30. Big blind called, under the gun called. So we have a $90 pot going to the flop, and I flop an ace. So I have a set of aces, just dream flop, and then two low cards. It checked around to me. I bet a third pot and get two callers, and then the turn card comes and it's a 5. Checks to me again. I bet 75% pot. This is all like a very standard line that I would take in any pot where I felt like I had a massive, there was a ton of EV to be won, and that my equity was really strong. So I B75, big blind calls, under the gun folds. And then the river comes another 5. So I have a boat. Big blind checks to me, and I believe I bet maybe a little bit over pot, and thinking I just really want to call here. And instead of a call, big blind raises me to about $500, which was about 2x or so, if I remember correctly. It might have been a little bit less than that from what I had raised. And I jammed, and he calls me and shows quads. So it went runner quads. He had pocket 5s. And I lost not only my entire stack in that last hand, but I was down, instead of leaving up 1K, I was down $400 on the session. And the worst part about it wasn't even necessarily that what had happened, because it was such a bizarre like set of events, and like the chances of that happening are so slim that there's really nothing. I don't know. It just seems it was so surreal and weird that I wanted to keep playing, but I couldn't keep playing because I had to get up the next day early for work, and I had a lot to do in my professional career, my other professional career, I guess you could say. And I couldn't keep playing. I really wasn't, in the moment, I didn't feel tilted. I didn't feel like I was going to go on a crazy run where I'm just jamming with any two cards, but I really felt like I'm ready to keep playing. I'm actually feeling okay. And I felt like the way that the table was structured, I felt like I had a little bit of an edge, and I was playing well, and I felt like I could continue to play well. And had it been a Saturday night, I don't work on Sunday mornings, I would have kept playing probably till, early in the morning, but I couldn't that night. And it was a really crappy feeling. The yes, it was terrible what happened to me with the cards, but what was really awful is that I felt like I had to leave. And that got me thinking about, well, maybe we can talk about today, Pete, the idea of when to leave a session and those external reasons for leaving a session. What are the good reasons to leave a session? Was I right to leave? Should I have kept playing? Should I have just said, in this moment, I can sacrifice a little bit of EV in my other career to continue to get more EV here? Or was that the right decision? And on a broader kind of zooming out broadly, like, what are some of the things we should be thinking about at the end of a session? What are good reasons for leaving? What are bad reasons for leaving?
Yeah, it's a really good topic. So first off, commiserations. Like, you've definitely been getting the same reaction all week that I've been getting, right? Like, my family and friends have been messaging me being like, Pete, we heard about your car accident. Are you okay? Like, if you need to talk, I'm here. If you need to process anything. And you've been getting it too, only like, oh my God, we heard what happened to your aces, your poor aces. Like, are you all right?
Yeah.
So probably the same thing we've been getting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. In terms of like whether it's right for you to have stayed on, well, my first thought is, well, you were going to leave anyway. Like, you just put the chips in the rack. So if you had stayed, you would have actually been staying to play because of losing that massive pot. Like, it would have been, in some sense, the compulsion of trying to make up for that loss in some way that was making you stay, right? And I think acting on a compulsion that's about righting the scales or getting back to being in the black or whatever, as opposed to being in the red, that's a slippery slope. And I think also, when we as humans start to violate like our routines and our rituals that we've set up to support our lives and to look after ourselves, basically, right? Like, for example, I try to work out between about 12 p.m. and 2 p.m. UK time, so just before this call that we have here, every workday. And if I can do that, I know that I avoid the doom hours. I'm going to say the doom hours. So the doom hours for me are like, I've just been working in the morning, I've just taken a break, or I've had lunch and I've taken a break. And if I come back up here and try to work in this office at that time of day instead of exercising, I feel like shit. And I feel like really vulnerable and angry and really snappy. And I'm really unproductive as well if I do that. So this is just like a parallel example, right? And if I get into the groove of working out every day at that time, I have really good days. Like, I've had a really great day today. I've just been thinking well, playing well at poker, making content really well. I felt like I've been nailing everything. And it's because this whole, like, the end of last week and start of this week, I've just been in that groove. I've been doing that. But if I fall short of that one day, if I just say, do you know what? Today I don't really want to go to the gym, or I don't really want to go for a run or a cycle, I just end up like not doing it for like 5 days. And then like after the 5th day, I'm like, why do I feel like shit? Like, mentally. And it's like so easy for us fragile, fleshy, pulpy humans to just like make one mistake that violates the boundaries we've set up for ourselves. And then suddenly it snowballs and we have like all of this like picking the pieces of glass up off the proverbial floor that we have to then do to repair ourselves and our lives. So I really feel like, Melissa, if you had stayed for 2 hours because of this and played poker and then come home and went to sleep, okay, you'd have been a bit tired the next day. Would that have been the end of the world? No, but like when a smoker lights up a cigarette after 5 years of not smoking, is it the one cigarette that they have that's the problem? Like, absolutely not, right? It's the habit that they've started, or maybe the ease with which they could fall into a bad habit. So my argument here for you would be, you did really well by sticking to the boundaries that the sort of the conscientious, self-loving you had put forward in advance to protect yourself from bad habits, patterns, eventualities. So I really think it's so important that we stick to that structure, those regimes that our best meaning self puts in place for the more vulnerable self of the moment, who may be drawn towards the flame of the instant gratification. It's so good that you didn't act on that. And I really feel like if that, like, you're a very, very methodical person. So if you didn't need that boundary between your actual career and your poker career, then you wouldn't have it. And if you didn't have it, you wouldn't need to worry about it. But the fact you do have it means that it probably should be there at least until a more, I'm going to use the word sober metaphorically here, a more like
Mm-hmm.
emotionally
Mm-hmm.
sober, less tired version of you is in the sort
Mm-hmm.
of pilot seat in command of the ship and can change the rule, but with, full sight of what she's doing.
Yeah. 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 I appreciate that. I think that that makes a lot of sense to me. Um, it's very there's a difference when I play like during the week versus the weekends. Like I tend to play like much longer sessions on the weekends because I don't have to worry about getting up the next day. And so, and my schedule in general is just more open on the weekends. And so playing during the week is a little more difficult because I often encounter a spot where I say, okay, it's midnight. Usually my cutoff is around midnight or 12:30, you know, and it's like I want to keep playing often, but I don't because I've established this schedule for myself. And I think that works for me. And now that you've kind of put it in those terms of like this is like the sober me planning out ahead of time. And then when you're in the moment, when you're in the session, you're not necessarily thinking, you're thinking differently. Um, and so I think that that works most of the time. The harder question though is when you don't have that, when you haven't put that barrier up, and it's like a Saturday night and you could play till 3 in the morning or 4 in the morning if you wanted to, and the game's good, or you're feeling like I think it's maybe the right time to leave, but I'm not really sure. Or I had this actually experience on Saturday night where I was in a really good game that was kind of kind of dying a little bit, but it wasn't totally dead yet. And but I was just tired. I was just really tired, and I was feeling like I was no longer thinking clearly, and so that kind of made it seem like okay, it's the right move to leave. But when you're not tired, when you're not feeling some kind of physical limitation to keeping you at the table, what are some of the things that we should be thinking about when it comes to making that decision about whether to leave? And I think that my idea is maybe having, is there a checklist? Is there a kind of way to make sure that you're using that sober part of your brain in a moment where you may not be thinking 100% soberly? You may be in a session, you may be, a little bit flush with the moment. Is there a way that we can kind of have a checklist that fits maybe not all situations, but most of them? And what would be on that checklist?
Yeah, it's a really good point. Um, okay, so let's explore this from the lens of what would be some less good reasons to leave a session first, and then maybe we can like whittle it down and come to the good reasons.
Sure.
So, in my experience as a coach and as a player, there's a few things. I'll just speak as a player because I'm sick of speaking as a coach. I do that like all the time. So this podcast is a nice opportunity for me to actually like speak from my own experience rather than the coaching lens all the time. So some bad reasons that I've left sessions for, or the most common reason I've actually left a session for, isn't that it's reached its natural conclusion or that I'm just done for the day or that I want to bag a win. It's that I want to shield myself from unpleasant sensations of losing. So historically, when I played full time, I always had to watch this about myself. I always had to monitor this side of me that wanted to just like stop playing, not just for like 15 minutes, but for the day or for like 3 days because I lost a few buy-ins. Because I hate the feeling of losing and I hate the feeling of coming from behind and trying to like climb a really uphill mountain of some sort. Like it feels bad when you're stuck, right? The reason we say stuck is that you are in a place that's difficult to shift out of. It would take tremendous momentous force, either from variance, like hauling you forward out of that place, or through your own sheer grit and long-term determination, grinding your way slowly out of that place. It's like you're stuck in the mud and your wheels just have to go so far around to get you out of it. That's a really off-putting thing for a lot of people, but I think it's so necessary to master the skill of staying in a session when things are going badly. Because like if I played live, I'd be so tempted, like during some, like say it's like just like the afternoon and I'm inside playing professionally, I'm running like shit, fish are just like winning against me, they're just hitting everything, they're like coolering me, and like it's sunny outside and I'm sat in this casino, I'm just like, fuck this, man, I just want to get up and like walk out of the casino and be outdoors and be like, what the fuck am I doing with my life? And go on, we've talked about like the 3 a.m. drive home from the casino where all you really want to do is like sit in Burger King and eat like 10 burgers and like wonder what you're doing with your life. Like we've talked about that feeling before. And I think it's so hard to accept like adversity, like extreme adversity, and stay in it and feel a sense of purpose and meaning while you stay in it. And I think this comes back to optimism, loyal Poker Distilled fans. Shame on the rest of you will know what I'm talking about from last week's episode
Yes.
on optimism and pessimism. But the more optimistic we are, the more meaning we can derive from what we're doing. That was one of our conclusions last week. And so I really think building the skill of saying, that's done. I've lost those 3 buy-ins. Now it's time to reset and it's time to just play poker as if this was the start of my session. And with every drop of enthusiasm I would have and optimism that I would have at the start of my session, that's an amazing skill, because for me as a glass cannon, as a player that can play a star game when I'm running well, Melissa, like really, really well, I can like, I'll be like, whoa, man, I'm playing so incredibly well today. Why is this happening? Oh, it's because I feel secure and comfortable and I'm running good. But then as soon as I take like 3 punches to the face from the deck, it's like, oh no, I don't want to throw in the towel now. I just have a fair weather player. I just don't want to play and under these conditions. So a bad reason to quit, as far as I'm concerned, is that you don't want to rise to the challenge of fighting through bad variants and playing on through adversity. I think a good reason to quit is when that goes so far that you actually don't have the capability to succeed in that endeavor and are likely to just thrash around and flail and play badly, and there's no coming back from it. So finding that sort of sweet spot where you just know that if you keep playing, only bad things are going to happen and you're just shot, you just have no chance of coming back from it, and being able to distinguish that from a kind of recognition of, I don't want to play, I'd rather not play right now. The expedient thing to do to satisfy the sort of egotistical monkey on my shoulder is to just leave and go and do something else and forget about this. But that's not the right thing to do, because I know I still have mileage in the tank here. I know that I can handle another few hours, and I can even handle another couple of stacks leaving my possession. I can even handle that, and it's my job as the poker player to play the volume that I need to play so that long term I can make a living and realize my maximum potential as a poker player.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I can absolutely relate to that. I actually have an experience that happens to me if I go a couple days without playing. Usually I play between like 3 or 4 days a week, and sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less, but that's kind of the average. But there's always like 2 days kind of in the middle of the week where I don't play. And that first day when I come back, and usually it's in the evenings after I get off of work, and I sit down at the table, and I've been at work all day, and I'm just kind of shifting into this different mode. There is a feeling I get that sometimes lasts for as long as 45 minutes to an hour of just, I don't want to be here, of sheer aversion to being in this setting, in this game. And the reason is because I'm like, I don't want to think about this. I don't want to have to like run this through my head of like, all of the thinking that has to happen at a poker table. And it's a completely like monkey brain kind of reaction to it. And I know that's not how I really feel. And it's just this instinct I have. It's this aversion to not so much the pain, but the work of like, shifting to a new environment. And this will happen even if I haven't been at work all day. This has happened when I've been on vacation or been traveling or been in Vegas and where I don't live, and sit down. Like I remember one time I went to Vegas, and like, we'd been traveling all day and got to Bellagio and like got my everything like done in my room and had dinner, and then like walked over to the poker room and sat down, and like all I thought about was like, I don't want to be here. Like I want to go sit and enjoy myself in a bar. I want to like not think. I want to like totally relax. Like this is awful. And that goes away usually within, like I said, 45 minutes to an hour. But it's such an interesting thought because it's like very natural. It's like this, it comes up without me even thinking about it. But then once it goes away, like it never comes back, until I take a break again. Then sometimes it returns.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's weird that you get that, because I think I can understand exactly what you're talking about when I think about being in a difficult chess position. So I play, or a difficult hand of bridge. Like I play other games competitively, not just poker. And sometimes those games throw a situation at me that are just like so bamboozling and rich in its complexity that you can really knuckle down and you can try to solve it. Or you can just be like, nah, I throw in the towel. It's too complicated. I shut down. I'm not doing it. And very often I lose chess games because I'm like, fucked if I'm solving this position. Like, yeah, there's all this stuff going on. And I could be like, how fascinating. Like, this is going to take 25 minutes of like really intense thought, and then I'll be able to outplay my opponent here and win this game. But instead, I'm like, this is so overwhelming that I'm just going to play bishop to h6. And I know it's a bad move, but I'm going to play it, hope I win. Then I'm just going to hope for the rest of the game instead of thinking. And it's definitely aversion. It's like this shutting down. What's interesting with you is that it happens as soon as you sit down. Like, you're not even in a hand yet, right? It's just happening when you sit at the table. And it's like, well, what is your brain interpreting that's the rest of that session as? Because I bet you a lot of people quit poker sessions, especially online, where it's like exhausting and draining and you don't get any downtime. And it's like multi-tabling and clicking button after button. I bet lots of people quit because they're just like, man, I can't deal with this anymore. I've been making decisions for 10 minutes. Loads of growth spots have come up. I just can't. I'm not doing it. So I wonder what our brains are interpreting that really complex chess position, that tough hand of bridge, that really annoying poker session as, or even just the idea that decisions may come your way and you will have to use your brain. What is that person within you? Like, what's she rebelling against? Is it like, I've been working all day, don't make me work anymore? Is it something like that, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've told you before that it doesn't matter what game I'm playing in or where the game is. I am nervous before every session, and I never sit down without having a queasiness in my stomach and feeling unsettled. It just has always happened. It's the same feeling I get in every time I play. It doesn't last very long. Sometimes it lasts a little longer than others, but there is never a time where I just sit down and I'm like ready to go. And I think it's really just me maybe preparing myself for the work. I mean, kind of like maybe at the beginning of like a run or exercising, like it's tough in the beginning and maybe you have things go through your head. Like, I don't want to be here. Like, I could be home sitting in my warm house watching TV and just like under a blanket, and like that's so much easier now. I think it's kind of like that. And that's also why I know deep down that it's good for me. I feel like, because I never get that feeling when I sit down to have a drink. I never get that feeling when I sit down to socialize. Sometimes I do, if depending on who I'm with, but for the most part, like, it feels like it's a good kind of, it's a grounding. It's a good kind of, I don't know. It feels there's something good about it, and it's not like it's a problem. It doesn't affect me from playing hands. It's not like, oh, I'm not going to play hands for the first 20 minutes until I settle down. Like, no. And oftentimes, as soon as I start playing hands, it goes away and I just kind of fall into a rhythm. But there's always that moment of, I think it's kind of like entering into a world that my brain has not fully processed yet and interpreted. And even if all the players at the table are regulars in my pool that I've played with before, it's never the same. The configuration is always a little bit different. Even if the players are sitting in different spots, it's like, okay, who's to my left, who's to my right, etc. That's all of that has to be processed, and all of that has to be interpreted, and all of that has to then be, it's all data. And so it feels like, maybe it's like, if you're trying to kind of like upload a lot of stuff on, I know nothing about technology, but like if you're trying to like upload something and it's like taking a long time to process, like the computer is really having a hard time handling it. I think it's something like that. That's what I think it is. And I think once I've downloaded the information, once I've processed it, interpreted it, then I can start understanding, okay, how do I react in based on this environment that I'm in. And it may be kind of a holdover from when I, before I really understood anything about poker theory, and I was playing, a purely kind of exploitative, way of playing, where I just was like, it was like totally player dependent, something like that. But I don't know. But regardless, I thought it's interesting to me, at least.
Hashtag fuck GTO and all of that. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank God you found the light, and you now are able to combine your talent for reading people and being emotionally in tune with what's going on around you with poker theory, which is also pretty important. So that's good. So
Yeah.
far we have aversion to bad results, aversion to adversity or further adversity in most people's cases, and aversion to mental effort and just the experience, the transition of going from not playing poker to being in a poker session as reasons to quit a session. So a lot of students actually, they do the second one a ton, Melissa. You know, this idea that you want to quit the session in some way when you first sit down, you're just like, I don't want to be here. I want to be at the bar, should be sitting there with a beer, relaxing, or whatever it may be, instead of being here, putting in more mental work. I think a lot of my students get that when they sit down, they fire up a table, they get bombarded with spots, and they're just like, no, this is overwhelming. Like, I don't know what to think. I can't access the thoughts I know I should be accessing. I can't apply the carrot poker school theory I've been learning. I can't access my shit. I know I've got my shit there. I've got my framework, but I can't pull it out at the right time. I can't grab those ideas, and they quit the session. And that is aversion to adversity and to effort at the same time. So these are bad reasons to quit a session. Another thing I want to say here is that when we talk about quitting, we might not be talking about physically stopping the activity. We might be talking about mentally quitting while continuing to play poker. This happens a lot. Students will shut down, go on to autopilot mode, stop engaging with spots, and start making half-hearted, I don't know, maybe like they'll revert to like old school thought processes that they had 5 years ago or something. Like, what does the brain do when it's under duress? When we're stressed, we like go to the most the deepest trenches of our neural pathways that we dug like many eons ago, and they're not the good ones, they're not the right ones that we want to be accessing, but we go to these like really ingrained mental processes that we know we can rely on effortlessly. Trouble is, they suck and they're really bad, and the student that does that, I would say they've quit their session. They've not left the session. They're still like hand on the mouse, hand on the keyboard, they're still looking at the screen, or they're still at the poker table, but they have checked out of the building, like mentally. They are no longer trying to engage with the spots that poker throws at them, and they're no longer trying to like imprint the best version of themselves onto those spots. When you play poker, you're like a conveyor belt operator. Like, you have like a stamp of your best EV solving ability, and a hand comes past you, or a node comes past you. Maybe a hand is like 6 different decisions, and each node of a hand, a decision point, right, let's say, comes past you, and you have to stamp it with your best effort, like your fullest potential that you possibly can, your most modern thought processes, the best version of yourself that you have currently accessible. And when you stop trying to do that, spots just pass you by and pass you by on this conveyor belt. This whirring conveyor belt is going on and on and on, and you're just like kind of flailing about with your stamp, like getting it all over the place, like not actually doing what you're meant to be doing. And like, most spots are just they're just not being dealt with. So I would say that before we get on to like some other bad reasons to quit, or even some good reasons to quit, quitting doesn't have to mean physically removing yourself. It could just be this like lack of engagement, right?
Absolutely. That's so interesting. So another thing that happened to me this last weekend, it was pretty eventful, I guess, now that I think about it. But so when I was playing on Sunday, like, I had like the first hand, I had like ace queen of clubs, and I ended up like rivering a flush, and I got paid, and it was great. And then I went card dead for like literally like 4 hours. And I know this because I was listening to music, and I listened to like 4 different albums that were both about an hour long. And it was like 4 hours long where I literally didn't get anything that was remotely playable. And I just watched my stack get blinded down, and then, it just kind of slowly start to disintegrate. And the mental effect of that is really interesting, because at least my brain starts telling myself I'm missing spots. So it's the exact thing that you're talking about, this conveyor belt. I'm like, I'm not thinking hard enough. I'm not engaged enough. I'm missing opportunities. Like, it's not realistic for me to be this passive and just continuing to fold. And I should be in more pots, et cetera, et cetera. When I start to, and then I start to think, well, because I've been so passive, when I actually start to get hands, no one's going to play me, because it's going to seem like I'm really, which is this is just all fantasy and it doesn't have any role in reality, but that's kind of how my mind works. And so when you talk about like checking out, mentally quitting. There's sometimes where you
Mm,
have to check out. I mean, I wasn't checked out. I was still looking at my cards. I was still, absolutely prepared to play to the best of my ability had I gotten dealt something that was playable. But the challenge became, I guess I didn't check out, or there wasn't really a checking out or checking in. It was more just the challenge shifted. So the challenge shifted from how do I play this spot to how do I maintain discipline and sanity and balance in this incredibly dry run of cards while I'm watching a poker game happen in front of me. I felt like I was just a passive observer.
yeah.
And what made me want to quit that day was like, I don't want to deal with this anymore. Like, I'm not, it's like whatever, the poker gods are not, don't want me to be here today. Like, whatever's happening is not, um, it's not working today. I've had this one good hand and this meager win, and maybe that's all I'm going to get today. And if I stay longer, bad things are going to happen. And so this was kind of the mental process. And so when you talk about like, deciding to leave, one of the things I immediately think about is like, well, you could really want to play, but still feel like you're being told to leave, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's the same when you're running bad, right? Like something is telling
Mm-hmm.
you you are in the blender here, and if you continue to play, more bad things are going to happen. It's just like pattern recognition for the human. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so live poker and online poker are very different in this way, in that when you're playing live, you're very likely to be dealt these sort of barren drought periods of variance where you're just dealt absolutely nothing, and your job is to keep it together in this like prison cell of just like boredom, this desert of isolation. And if the table chat isn't particularly good, or you don't have any friends near you or something like that, that can be a really lonely and tedious place to be. It's almost what I'd imagine it's like to be in like solitary confinement or something. Okay, it's not that
Mm-hmm.
bad, but it's like a real isolating thing when you're just dealt nothing and the game is happening around you and you're just kind of watching it happen. So for the live player, yeah, this is a real problem. And I think like switching off to some extent is totally necessary. I think you do have to disengage, but that's different. That's not that you're being given loads and loads of spots in the conveyor belt and you're just like, oh, I'm not touching them, I'm just
Mm-hmm.
disengaging with them. Actually, there's nothing on the conveyor belt for like a long
Mm-hmm.
period of time. It's just this empty belt going round and round and round. Like when you're at the supermarket, you can see like where the belt goes into the like machine, and it's just like nothing on it. It's just going round and round. So when that happens, it's a totally different thing. Like you're meant to switch off, but when you're playing online, like online players won't be able to associate so well with this because online players are just constantly in spots, especially in fast fold
Mm-hmm.
games like Zoom. There's basically no downtime.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you switch off there, it has disastrous effects, and it's never correct to switch off for any amount of time, basically. So that sort of quitting is definitely bad. But yeah, quitting because you're being sent a negative message over and over again by variance is a bad form of quitting because you're prescribing some kind of divine order to the random bad or tedious mundane things that are happening to you, and then like by like embracing that narrative and accepting it as true in some subconscious level, you're actually like going a bit insane, right? And you're acting on information that's not real information. So that's another bad reason to quit. Adversity, fear of effort, patterns that are like negative in the short term, these are all bad reasons to quit a session. Can you think of any other bad reasons to quit a session? Or is it time to move on to good reasons to quit?
Um, I don't know if this is a bad reason necessarily, but what about obligations, outside obligations? So a lot of times, this is something that I think is more prevalent with live players and more kind of amateur, fishy kind of live players. Will they'll say things like, I only have a couple hours to play. I got to go pick up my kids. I have to go do this or do that. Like, um, and I always try and I think because I play consistently and pretty seriously, like I never schedule anything if I'm gonna be playing that day. It just never works. Like I'm never like, okay, like I'm gonna go play for a couple hours and then I'll meet you for dinner. There are very, very rare exceptions where like that will happen, usually if I'm on vacation or something. But um for the most part, when I'm in my regular game, I'm playing just with an open-ended, like there's no obligation because I know that if there's an obligation, that makes it more difficult to play, because I know that I have it coming up and I have to leave the game, or I don't want to leave the game, but I have to leave the game. And so I think maybe I actually would put this as a bad reason, I think, to if you are either so desperate to play that you are scheduling playing, trying to jam it in between things, a couple hours here, a couple hours there. I think maybe I'm talking about live play here. I don't have experience online, so I'm not sure how that works, but because live is so much slower and requires so much more of a time commitment, it doesn't work to have outside obligations interfering generally. And I think avoiding that at all costs is like essential to being successful, or at least reorganizing your life, restructuring your life to make sure that doesn't happen. I think it's better to not play than it is to play when you have some kind of obligation pending that you have to leave the session for. So maybe this would be something that we could put into the bad category.
Yeah, I agree. I think like playing for an hour and a half in a live game makes absolutely no sense. Like by the time you've settled into the session, it's time to go again. Live poker definitely needs to be played in long blocks rather than short bursts. And yeah, shame on you if you have like children and want to pick them up from school or something. That's totally unacceptable. You should never put your kids before you're gambling, ever. Jokes aside, I think this is a bad reason. It's also just evidence that the life and poker career has been structured in a bad way. If you're a live player and you're like, as you say, you're like saying, I'm going to play 1 hour of poker, then I'm going to leave again. Like, you don't really get how live poker works, right? I don't think that's at all practical. So I like your idea of like only playing when you know you can dedicate loads of time to it, because imagine like you have a losing day as well. And I found this when I played professionally as an online player back in the day as well. If I had a really bad session and then I had to like go and have dinner with my girlfriend at the time or something like that, I just didn't want to be there. But like, oh, I've finished work and I've dropped like 11 buy-ins, like I've ran like shit and I've tilted and I feel like a total dick. And then like you've just come home and you're like, hi, and the door's closed and I'm in this chair. Oh my God, I can picture the fucking office of this old flat, like going back like 8-9 years here, Melissa. I can actually picture myself there and I'm just like, please don't come home from work. Oh God, you've come home from work. This is hell. Not because I hated her. I didn't hate her. Like, she was all right, my ex-girlfriend. It didn't work out, but definitely didn't have any animosity towards her generally. But when I was running bad, I just like I just wanted to lock myself in a box. I wanted to go out for like a long walk on my own for 2 hours. Like, it was really hard to decompress. So another bad reason for quitting is because you've set yourself up to have to do something social or like responsible when you've just been playing poker, because I feel like we all need time to decompress and unwind and sort of unpack a session. Whether it's a big winning session or a big losing session, we need time to be able to like chill and just get back to our optimal, normal, real life version of ourselves after that. So I love the way that you do it, setting out those blocks like that. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, I've had a couple of those experiences too. Over the Christmas holiday, I actually took a shot at like the biggest game I ever played, which was like a 5, 10, 20 and at a casino in Connecticut. And like, it didn't go particularly well. And it wasn't like the most I ever lost, but it was a lot. And I had to leave early. Like, the game was so good and I should have kept playing. I wanted to keep playing, but I had to leave early because I was meeting my family for dinner and it was like the holiday dinner. And so like, I wasn't like going to like miss it. And, yeah, it was tough to socialize in that environment, but they had they had a lot of good wine at that restaurant, so that helped. All right, so what are we need to talk about good reasons to leave,
because there are good reasons to leave. It's not like we're just advocating this perpetual state of poker. Like, sorry, the only reasons to leave are bad reasons. So I'm here for 6 days, man. Like, give me a place to sleep, give me a shower, some food. We'll just play for 6 days. Let's go. I actually think that side of things is really unhealthy. I think like the thing that Joey Ingram did back in the day, this is maybe before you were on the scene poker-wise, Melissa, but he once played like a 4-day straight session or something like that. Don't quote me on that. It might not have been 4 days, but it was like, I think it was like 48 hours of continuous online poker or something like that. And he like streamed it and it was like a huge high-profile thing. Like, Joey's a bit mental. He does things in extremely long bursts. Like, he's either all in or he's all out. Like, we kind of know this. But that was insane. And a lot of poker players do that too. Like, just like quite recently, there was a person on our Discord group, I don't know if you remember this, that was like, I play for 20 hours and then I have a breakdown. Is this okay? And I was like, no.
Oh my God. No, I didn't see that.
I was like, no, this is not okay. And just because your buddies do it, was like, my buddies do this too. We all play for 20 hours and then we feel like shit. And then we like sleep for 2 days and then we're depressed. It's like, yeah, this is not okay. Like, this isn't fine. So at one end of the spectrum, you have like the glass cannon that quits after like half an hour and can't handle any effort or adversity, or makes like commitments so that they don't have to play at the casino for 6 hours and like ruins their own career, sabotages themselves that way. At the other end of the spectrum, you have like the guy that does the Joey Ingram experiment, but like all the time, just because they have really terrible, uncultivated life habits. That's really bad too. So this degenerate, like, I'm going to play poker for 15 hours every time I play. I'm going to play for like 5 hours with no break. I'm going to have like a bottle under the table instead of going to the bathroom. Like all this crazy shit that you hear people do. It's just way too far in the other direction. So like a good reason to quit is that you're cutting it short before you get to Joey Ingram's experiment. Like, you don't want to piss in a bottle, and you need to eat, and you need to sleep, and you need to like live. You need to be a human being in a civilized like world where you have a house, and you're not going to like live in this depraved environment just because you're addicted to online poker. So a good reason to stop playing is that your normal like needs as a human have summoned you away from poker. They've called upon you, and now it's time to close down the software and go and eat a sandwich, or like go and do something else, or get some fresh air. So when life comes a calling, you can't let poker like force you to stay. So a good reason to quit is that it's healthy to not sit and stare at a screen for like hours and hours and hours on end, or it's healthy not to be in the casino for 12 hours a day every day. Good reason to quit is to look after yourself as a human being and live your life the way that human beings are meant to in order to be happy.
Right. And I think a big part of that is sleep. For me, that's a huge part, because I struggle with sleep. And if you listen to any kind of poker mindset training, like it is all consistent. Like sleep is like a huge part of it. And I think for a live player, it's really difficult, because I think generally in most places the games are better at night, and the players are looser. There's more action, there's more drinking, et cetera, et cetera. So having to kind of juggle, the normal responsibilities of life that happens during the day, and then the poker responsibilities which happen at night, and melding those two in a way that doesn't mean that you're sleeping, that you become completely nocturnal, or you're sleeping all day and only wake at night. I think, maybe you can do that if you're like a single person and you're young and maybe you live alone or something. But that's not something I can do. I don't think I'll ever be able to do that. So sleep becomes an issue. And I've definitely had times and sessions like I mentioned earlier, where I've left games because I'm just too tired to continue to play. And when I mean that, it's not like I'm falling asleep at the table, although I've seen that happen multiple times to people that fall asleep at the table. It's like, the last time I was in Vegas, there was a guy who he played for like 4 days straight. And I know he was there because I would leave and I would come back and he was still there. And the last day he was literally just like sleeping in between hands. It was really amazing, but that wasn't what was happening to me. But what happens is that I find myself missing, like my thought process slows down. I get sluggish. I'm not as responsive to what's happening at the table. Sometimes worst case scenario is I miss really important kind of live reads. Like a good example is I'd gotten to a spot where this is one player I was continually putting a lot of pressure on, not because necessarily I was trying to do that, well, because a couple times I just had the best hand and I was putting a lot of pressure on, and he was folding and folding, folding. And I finally got into a spot where I bluffed him on all 3 streets, and he called me down with like third pair. And he was like, I'm never folding to you again. And I realized that I should have realized that earlier before the river, because on the turn, when I bet 75% of the pot, he snap called me. He was just like, I call, like before my chips even left my hand. And that should have been my signal.
Yep.
This guy is not folding the river. This guy feels like I've been running over him and he is done folding to me.
Yep.
That was like the clear signal, but I missed it because it was 2 a.m. and I was tired and I thought, oh, this river is a good spot for me to bluff. Everything's in order. You know,
I'm just laughing because it's like the poker nerd and the guy's like, fuck you, bro. If you bluff the river, I'm going to call you. And the guy's like, yes, well, favorable blockers. And range is entitled to maybe 61%.
That's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened. I was like, oh, this is like, okay, this is the spot. And what was so funny is that in my head, I'd actually encountered a couple of similar spots where like I didn't bluff for a number of different reasons that I don't think were necessarily bad, but it was just that in that spot, it felt like, okay, this is the time.
Yeah, you're due a bluff or something.
I was just like clearly like just ignorant to this guy. And so when he snap called me and, you know, I was like, okay, that's my signal. Like I'm no longer picking up on, you know, the burning building right in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm continuing to walk into it. You know, and so that's like a good reason for me to quit. And I think in general, like if you're no longer functioning cognitively at the level that you need to be, and, you know, like a live poker game, really no matter the stakes, unless you're in a totally awful nitty game, you know, can be quite dangerous if you're not, you know, if you're not sharp. And I think this is always the difficulty too, if you ever drink and play at the same time. It's like, you know, I'm not one of these people that's like, oh, you have to be, you know, have to be drinking water the whole time. You have to be like one of these like grinders that you see in Vegas that have like the water bottles in front of them on the table. It's like signaling to everyone, like, I am not drinking. I'm like here completely sober. I'm not one of those people. But it's very difficult because you have to balance like not losing that edge, because if you lose that edge and then cards don't go your way or you make the bad decisions, it can be brutal. So I think one good reason to leave is A, you're too tired, B, maybe you've had too much to drink, and C, you've you know, for whatever reason, like maybe you've received some news on your phone, maybe you've gotten a text message from someone that has affected you. Maybe some part of your life has interfered and you're no longer thinking clearly. Like I think that's absolutely a good reason to leave. All of those I would put in the kind of same category.
Yeah, like outside world infringement that just makes it the case that we can't focus at the level we need to in order to have enough EV for it to be worth being there, right? Because we do need to have a certain hourly in place in order for us to want to go and play. Like if I said to you, tomorrow you'll go and play and your win rate will be 0.01 BB per 100, you'd be like, I think I won't bother, right? Like if you knew that was going to be your win rate. So yeah, the alcohol thing is interesting because I always find that when I drink, I play a bit better, like after a few. And then if I go past that, I start just like playing like a moron and just ignoring like the myopia just becomes like too much. The tunnel vision is too extreme. And it's like drinking for me is like if anyone watching on YouTube right now, like I'm doing this ridiculous pose with my hands at my face, it's like this thing that closes in on you as you have more and more and more. So at first it's like helpful because like you go from no filter at all to like something like focusing you and blanking out some other stuff that you don't need. But that myopic tunnel vision, when it becomes like too much, it starts to become like you just act out of like perceived lunacy. You're just like, well, why couldn't you see that the guy was like, I'm going to call you if you bluff the river, is basically what this person was saying. In your case, it was tiredness, not drunkenness, but it's the same thing, that you become so fixated on the factors that your brain can process that it ignores the ones that can. And it's the same with alcohol. Like you end up like shutting down your ability to see to like pick up on like changes in your environment, right? You just don't see that anymore. And I agree. I think it's a tricky balance. And I'm like you, that when I play, I don't mind having a beer. I really enjoy just like clicking buttons on 4 tables while having a couple of drinks. It's like one of my favorite things to do, actually. But when it gets to the point where like I'm drunk, that's when it's like, well, now there's nothing productive you can do anymore. You know, like you've now reached the point where the best thing you can do is drink 2 pints of water and go to bed, because nothing else is going to add any EV. If you try and socialize, you're not even going to be good at that. Like if you try to like eat something, you'll just eat shit and you'll just like make yourself you'll just like undo all the progress you've been doing on your fitness or whatever. So you may as well just go to bed and be like, right, I'm now a shit useless version of myself, so let me just end all of my activities. Let me shut down the computer because it's too buggy and it needs a restart before it can run any applications. So the drinking one is a good one. The outside, like you get bad family news, like you definitely shouldn't sit and play suffering through that. That's a really good one. I wonder if there are any other good reasons to quit a session. What about being too tilted? Like what if you're just like at
Yeah.
a point where you're so angry and emotional that at a bare minimum you need like half an hour to calm down before you can even think about re-entering that mode where you're like discerning variables closely, picking up on things, being astute, all of the, you know, the frames of mind that you need to be in to be good at poker, they're like completely unavailable to you once you're past a certain point of anger. So do you ever become angry when you're playing, or is there another negative emotion that can overwhelm you to a
Oh
point where
yeah.
you feel like it's like the best thing to do is for you to quit? And have you quit sessions based on those emotions, and correctly so in your opinion?
Well, I definitely have gotten angry. A lot of times I get angry at myself more than, anything else. Every once in a while, like some player will really annoy me. But in those cases, like if it's another player, like I'll just generally try and move tables before I'll actually leave the session. I've definitely had times where I've gotten so tilted where I felt like this is not productive for me to be here, but not anything that I can remember specifically. I generally try and play through that. And a lot of my mental exercises that I do, um, I feel prepared for those emotions at the table. And so when they come, I'm able to kind of navigate them. I am sure that there will be situations in the future that will be un, that I will not be able to handle and will have to leave. But um, generally, that's not something that I deal with. Um, as far as like leaving a session, I I don't remember any time leaving a session because I mean, maybe when I was first playing, if I felt like generally when I was first playing, I'd leave because I didn't have any money left. So I just had to leave. But yeah, I can't say that is something that affects me like leaving because of tilt. It affects me. I get tilted and I've felt angry, but I generally try and play through it. Every once in a while, I'll get up and leave the table, but even that feels like a defeat because I don't want to give it that much credit, whatever the emotion is. But every once in a while, I have had to leave the table and walk around, sit outside or something.
Yep. Yeah, I know what you mean. It's like if you leave while tilted, it's like you're letting the tilt win, and that's something that I
Yeah.
let happen so many times when I was coming up through the ranks. Like I would tilt really quickly as well. Like I'd be fine, and then I'd make one mistake. It was usually my own mistakes or perceived mistakes that set me off, rather than like just like getting kings in against queens and them hitting a queen or something like that. And so when I did that, I would just fall completely off the horse. It would be like, well, it's like the kid walking along with like a plate of birthday cake or something, and like they drop a little bit of it on the floor as they go to eat it, and then they just throw the entire cake on the ground and start stomping on it and like hitting the other kids
Mm,
and stuff like that. That was kind of me as a child, you know, I was very tantrumy as well. So I definitely have this built in programming where if things don't go my way, I'm going to tantrum until they do. And I was given a lot of that from my dad when I was a kid. Like, okay, let's just make
mm,
it okay for you because otherwise you're going to be a right dick about it. So let me just give
mm,
you what you want because it's easier. So you can
mm,
say what you want about that kind of parenting. Let's not get into like a crusade here. My dad was actually really great in most ways, but one thing he could have done is like kept that little brat in a bit of a shorter leash just so he didn't like go off the handle as successfully. I want to use that word. I successfully tantrumed my way to changing the environment for what I wanted, you know, not necessarily for the better, but for what I wanted it to be.
mm,
So what that
mm,
did was it ingrained this idea that when things go badly at poker, I will tantrum and start like playing really atrociously. And for me, I actually did take it out on the felt. Like at first, like at the start of my poker career, I might like shout or something or punch the table, but I would more often just like do really impulsive tilted shit and then just end up having this like hateful monologue self-talk of like, why are you playing like an utter idiot? What the fuck is wrong with you? And just like of that kind of self-talk for a long time. And then as I became a bit better at mental game, I moved from that to like expressing the bratish tantrumness as like fuck this guy and punch the table and shouting. And that makes me sound like an absolute lunatic. So if I go back to that flat in like 2013, like kind of early to middle days of my poker career, I picture myself there. And instead of taking so many things out of the table, because in the last flat before that, I'm like in the kitchen in like 2010, and my girlfriend before that one I was just talking about, she's in the kitchen and I'm like in this ball of like bunched up hatred, and I'm like not talking or even like unleashing anything, but I just feel awful. And then on the screen it's just like all in, call, just like every time there's a decision it's just awful. Then I fast forward a few years and it's like the right buttons are being pressed now, but I'm like screaming and shouting and kicking things, and I'm like a nightmare. I look way unhealthier in that 2012 version than in the 2010 version, but actually I'm playing way better poker. Like through the tilt, I'm playing through the tilt a little bit. I'm still hating it. And now when things go bad, it's a much more like calm. It's still like fuck this and blah blah blah. There'll never be like no disgruntlement. There'll always be some kind of like backlash there. But now it's like very manageable, and I lose 5 stacks, and it's like okay, running like shit. Let's call it a day there, and there is like that inevitable. I'm going to quit because I feel that at this point I can't actually play well anymore. But you have to be so careful to distinguish that from the point where you just don't want to play. Like, no one wants to play down 5 buy-ins, but successful pros have to, because you'll be down 5 buy-ins pretty often as an online pro, down 3 buy-ins or 2 buy-ins pretty often as a live player.
Yeah. I think one of the things I struggle with is when I am down 1 or 2 buy-ins, there's a feeling in me of like, oh, God, now it's going to take me that much longer to grind that money back, to grind those chips back, which is not realistic, right? Because you could win a huge pot and win it back. But in my mind, it's like, gosh, I was only planning on being here for another hour. Now, like, my plans have changed, and now it's like I have to sit here and like grind it all back. And that's more like something that I like gets to like the fact that I'm an impatient person, and I'm also naturally pessimistic. As we talked about last week, loyal Poker Distilled fans by now will know that. But I feel like, okay, now I'm just gonna have to like, it's gonna just take a lot longer to get back to where I was, and resetting and all of these kinds of mental tricks that your brain plays on you to make you feel like shit when you're down. And it's even in a live session, because the game is slow, slower than online, it can feel even worse, because then you have to sit there and watch people limp, and play every hand, when it's like, you don't have to play, you don't have to limp in every hand, you could fold some. But those are the tough moments for me that require me to kind of reset and play through. But I think, where was I had something to say and now I'm forgetting my point ultimately.
Yeah, well you think, I think
that,
it's really
if there was a point.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I just find that hilarious, this idea that like you're impatient, you want your money back, you're keeping score in this really arbitrary, pointless way, where a session, you're like, because the sun hasn't set yet this time, this is now the time where I have to make all the money back, because when the sun's set, there'll be a different score on the board, and it'll be a different match, and like I'll have lost this match. It's like you're playing like a baseball game or something like that against yourself. And it's also funny that the fish delaying you by going, like, I just imagine that the dealer's like, action's on you, and the guy's like, call. And the dealer's like, call. Then it's the next guy, and he's like, call. And you're just sitting there like, you fucking whales. Like, how dare you inconvenience me in this way when I'm trying to get all my money back? That's hilarious.
Yes, that is the ego. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so we've outlined loads of good and bad reasons for quitting. I think this has been a really productive chat. I think we should get to Pete versus Troll just before we wrap up today, the segment where I take on some kind of troll that has said something to me over the course of the last week or so. Few ones to choose between today, Melissa. I think I'm going to go with this comment, which isn't really very trollish, because this person's being serious and they're not being disrespectful to me, but they are being disrespectful to one of my role models, my heroes, which is, of course, Mr. Jordan B. Peterson.
Oh no.
Yeah,
oh God.
They're disrespecting our deity here, Melissa. This is quite serious. So let me read to you what they've said. So on last week's Poker Distilled, this person said, after I got over the Lobster Man reference, that's what they're calling Jordan because of his whole bit about lobsters. I actually talked about that in a video today. I love the lobster chat. It's really important to see yourself as a dominant, victorious lobster that all the female lobsters want, because if you view yourself as the defeated lobster, you're going to play like shit and you're going to like not bluff anyone, and it's really bad for your game. But anyway, says, after I got over the Lobster Man reference at the start and processed the if he listens to that egregious pseudo-intellectual twat waffle, how credible can this human possibly be? End
Okay.
quotes. Thoughts? I actually really enjoyed this podcast. So first off, thank you. I'm glad that you enjoyed Poker Distilled.
That's great.
I
Yeah.
said in response, "Hey, buddy, you leave the lobster man alone, eh? Man." That's what I said in response. And then he said, "Carrot Corner Poker Education. Oh, I leave him alone, all right. If I needed someone to tell me to tidy my room, he'd be my guy. But I like science, and he's been so factually demonstrably wrong so many times. I really wish he'd stay in his lane." And off my radar, 3 laughing, crying faces. By the way, no one ever
Hmm.
laughs to that extent where they're like, like tears
Yeah.
falling out of their eyes onto the
Yeah.
fucking microphone. That doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so what do you think about that, Melissa? Like, what should we say to this person who has really made a vicious assault on our hero, the lobster man here?
And our hero, yeah. I think it's a good comment and I appreciate it. And I actually just take the compliment. That's all I hear. But I don't hear insults against the lobster man. No, but I think like as an insult against Peterson, it's interesting that he said he makes factual misstatements, like scientifically, like he's not correct. And that's interesting because most people criticize him for being cruel, mean, having any kinds of the numerous phobias that are, he's hurting marginalized groups, et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of refreshing that that wasn't the criticism, but I don't know what he would be factually wrong about. I mean, unless he made some kind of claim about COVID and something, or some kind of like scientific misstatement. Because like as a scientist, like he's not. I mean, I don't know if you're taking issue with like his clinical diagnosis or like his way that he interprets like psychologically what's going on with someone.
Could be
I think
climate
that's
change or something as well. He talks a lot about
maybe. Oh
climate
yeah,
change. Could
that's
be.
could be it.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah. But I think that um his actual like psychological practice as like a clinician is probably maybe the least controversial part about him. I don't know. But yeah, he's a polarizing figure,
Mm.
and I get some of that, and I think that he came on the scene. If you are someone who responds to kind of YouTube, the kind of activist left and the kind of like activist YouTube um comments and kind of that whole movement, like yeah, he came on as a really polarizing figure, but the argument he was making was quite basic, which is like we shouldn't be compelling speech, which I think most people should be able to agree with. I mean, I think people can have a lot of different opinions about pronoun usage, but you know I don't think most people want to like hold a gun to someone's head and like force them to say something they don't believe. So I mean, maybe some people do, I don't know, um but that was his like how he came on the scene originally. I do think he has made some incendiary comments, on Twitter, and I think that he's been under a lot of pressure, and I think that he's definitely been in situations that I think are negative EV, I guess you could say, for
Yep.
him as like a professional commentator. I think you and me both agree that like him going to the Daily Wire was probably not the greatest move for him in terms of like getting people to listen to him who aren't necessarily conservative or religious or on the right side of things.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely understand that, but I would encourage anyone who is, interested in learning more about him, or maybe is, feeling a bit open-minded, go and listen to his biblical lectures, which he recorded live in 2016 or 2017, kind of right before he became super famous. And he doesn't approach it from a kind of, he's not, well, no one really knows if he believes in God or not. He never really gives that answer, but he goes through the Bible stories and talks about how they have the psychological importance of them and what they tell us about how we create stories and myths as a society and as human beings. And it's one of the most profound and kind of beautiful lectures I've ever heard. And there's nothing in them that is at all controversial. And I will say that as someone who like generally can put myself in the mind of like someone on the left side of things politically. There's nothing in there. It's just pure theory and philosophy, and there's a lot of humor in it. And so I would encourage someone to maybe go back and look at that before you look at maybe what he's doing now or some of the more controversial positions he's taken.
Yeah, and you're kind of you're responding to a different point there, like defending the Lobster Man from the critique that was given on the YouTube comment there. I mean, I don't really know. I don't know. Like, I'm not a scientist. I don't really engage a lot
Yeah.
with science. I'm not interested in science, like particularly. But I'd like to hear, more about why, like, what things he's been wrong about or whatever. And
Yeah.
maybe like he's not a scientist, right? He's a clinical psychologist or whatever, and he
Yeah.
knows a lot about that field. And it's very possible that he could be wrong about other things. I just think that what I really like about him is just his whole logical ability to philosophize through things in almost like a classical philosopher, but in like a modern day context. And I think that's extremely rare and extremely lacking these days. And as someone with a philosophy background and just a logical background in general, like poker's the same thing. It's just logical argumentation, really, in selecting the right variables, combining them in the right way, getting the right conclusions and the right premises, having a valid and sound argument. That's what poker is. I think he just does that very well about some really interesting topics. So it's not that I'm like massively aligned with like his politics or anything like that. I just really think that he's rare in the modern day climate and that he can speak so eloquently in a kind of philosophical argument, logical argumentative way that's really engaging and good to listen to. So I always find that when I listen to the certain people that I listen to, um, who give me like a kind of inspiration or like make me more positive, more like upbeat. And like for some reason, when I listen to him, when I listen to Lobster Man, I tend to have more of a positive day than if I listen to someone who's more venti, angry, kind of like
Mm,
protesty. There are a lot of like podcasters I listen to who are more about like venting against a certain cause or whatever. And when I listen to that kind of content, whether it's on the left or on the right or on the center, it doesn't really matter. I'll just have a more negative day. I'll just be more worried about the negative things.
sure.
So back to optimism and pessimism, while like he's Lobster Man can be like that sometimes, I think that very often he can be quite uplifting, to listen to his
Hmm.
lectures in particular. His older stuff can be really uplifting. But anyway, we could go on all day about this. We better wrap up this episode
Yeah.
here. This has been a fascinating discussion once again, Melissa. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I did too. And thank you for the comment. Appreciate it. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, do troll us. Don't really troll us,
Yeah.
but do comment. We will play many more rounds of Pete versus Troll. Hopefully, I get like some completely egregious, obnoxious, disgusting comment,
Yeah.
like the one about the streaming den again for next week. That guy's been quiet, so come at me, insult my streaming den, do something that riles me up. You might make it on the podcast, but in the meantime, guys, do leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Do rate us on Spotify. Like the video on YouTube, comment on YouTube, and do comment in the Discord group as well. We'd love to hear from you if you are lucky enough to be part of our community. It's carrotcorner.com for all the paid content from me, Pete Clark, and from both of us. Yeah, have a good week, run good, and we'll see you next time on Poker Distilled.
Bye.
Bye for now.